Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Tiana Godsey. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the events coordinator for Natural Lands. I'd like to welcome you to our Outdoors Online, Out on the Land webinar with Driftless Conservancy's communication specialist, Emilee Martell, she, they pronouns. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first event of this kind, and we are thrilled to teach you all about the inherent queerness of nature. Happy Pride Month. I won't take up too much of your time, but before we get started, just a few things to note. This event is being recorded. If you need to leave the meeting, no worries. You can just skip right back in. There is a waiting room, so I will try to let you in as timely as possible. Please bear with us. And we will be sharing the recording with you after the event, hopefully within a week. Due to the webinar style of this event, we ask that you remain muted throughout the event. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat feature and we will answer them at the end of the event. If you'd like to ask something anonymously, please feel free to email us at the end. Please remain respectful throughout the duration of this event. Quickly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Natural Lands. Many of you, I believe, are very familiar with us. We are a nonprofit organization serving Eastern PA and Southern New Jersey to preserve and nurture nature's wonders and create opportunities for joy and discovery in the outdoors for everyone. We've been at it since the early 1950s, and today nearly 5 million people live within 5 miles of lands under our permanent protection. Our mission is to save open space by permanently protecting natural areas through acquisition and voluntary land protection agreements, and by helping communities preserve more of their land. We have saved more than 125,000 acres so far. To care for nature, which we do by taking care of our network of 42 nature preserves and 1 public garden located in 2 states and 13 counties, which is a total of 23,279 acres, roughly. And to connect people with the outdoors, even online, like we are doing tonight, by creating opportunities for people to connect with and learn from and about nature. A brief moment to thank each and every one of our Natural Lands members, many of us who are here with us tonight. Your support makes all of the stewardship work possible on all of those preserves. Thank you for the significant impact you have on our efforts to save open space, care for nature, and connect people to the outdoors. And if you are not a member yet, we invite you to please check out the link, natlands.org/membership. Thank you, and I'm happy to introduce our presenter tonight, Emilee Martell. As I mentioned before, Emilee is Driftless Conservancy's communication specialist. She, they, is a land conservationist, writer, and aspiring farmer based in the beautiful St. Croix River Valley of Northwest Wisconsin, coming to us all the way. I first met Emilee through this past year's Land Trust Alliance rally. She had a presentation which is very similar to the one you're about to enjoy, which piqued my interest. I believe you will see why. So Emilee, please take it away. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here virtually on the East Coast. I will pull up my presentation real quick and then we can get underway. All right. How does that look? Good?
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So yes, thank you so much for coming to Out on the Land. So as Tiana mentioned, just to start us off, let's all have a nice time tonight. Queerness is a super fun topic, but can be a sensitive one too. So, we can just all be kind to one another, and I'll trust that, questions and comments folks have are made in good faith, and that I appreciate you engaging with this. And questions are totally welcome. So if you want to put them in the chat, please do. Otherwise, if you want to ask something anonymously, there is this website called Mentimeter where you can submit questions, and I will be monitoring that on my phone. So to use it, you can just go to menti.com and then enter this code 62644131. And that'll pop up a few more times. We'll have some pauses throughout the presentation so you can take you know, you don't have to memorize that right now if a question comes up. So first off, as Tiana mentioned, I am the communications specialist with Driftless Area Land Conservancy, which if I mention in the presentation, I might mention as DALC. That's our acronym. I am also an aspiring farmer, so I also work on a couple farms here in Wisconsin. My hometown is Somerset, which is the far western edge of Wisconsin near the Twin Cities, and my pronouns are she, they. So also to start us off, just want to do a land and history acknowledgement. So Dulk works in the homeland of the Sauk, Fox, Miami, Sioux, Kickapoo, and Ho-Chunk nations. I grew up in and currently live in the homeland of the Sioux and Ojibwe nations. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of indigenous nations here in North America and beyond did not historically have the same gender binary as Europeans. So you know, even the cultural gender binary that is really dominant in our society today is, you know, sort of historically speaking, a fairly new thing in our neck of the woods. You've probably heard the term Two-Spirit that was coined in the 1990s by Indigenous folks as kind of an umbrella term for Indigenous LGBTQ plus people. I'm not Indigenous myself, so I won't get into it too much more than that. But there are lots of really cool folks doing great work and interesting things all across the continent. So as Tiana mentioned, I first gave this presentation at our National Land Trust Conference. So that one was kind of, you know, more oriented towards action items for land trusts. So the bulk of this presentation is about our wonderful queer native species, but I did want to keep in a little bit of the just kind of general LGBTQ stuff. So we'll quickly go through some terminology basics. So, folks, I'm sure are familiar with our wonderful alphabet soup. So we've got lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. Then we get into a few of the rarer varietals, maybe. So Q is for queer. It can also be for questioning. I is for intersex. So again, even in this culture where we have this very dominant gender binary, humans can have more than two sexes. We have all kinds of really unique and valued you know, variations in our own bodies. So those folks are part of this umbrella. And then A, you might have heard stands for ally, which it definitely can, but also we don't want to forget our friends, the asexuals and aromantics. So folks who don't experience or experience a different spectrum of sexual and romantic attraction. Those terms will come up when we talk about our native species. And then we have the plus because there are lots and lots of other folks under this very enormous queer umbrella. So to touch on a little bit more of that too. So just sex versus gender, folks use these as synonyms, but they're really not. So sex is very scientific based on reproductive organs. Gender is an identity influenced by society and culture. You might have heard the acronym AGAB or something similar. That stands for assigned gender at birth. So for instance, I am AFAB, so assigned female at birth. So just kind of a way to identify where you started in our, again, like societal gender norms. The term cisgender, that's just when a person's gender identity corresponds with their biological sex, so they're not transgender. Cishet is kind of a handy shorthand for cisgender, heterosexual, not queer. Non-binary or genderqueer is when your gender identity is not entirely male or entirely female. So obviously, huge, enormous, infinite spectrum. Gender dysphoria is a term that has come up a little more often these days. That's the distress from dissonance between your assigned gender at birth and your own gender identity. But there's an opposite of that, which is gender euphoria. And this is the joy and relief of experiencing your gender in a way that feels right. And everyone can experience dysphoria and euphoria. You know, I felt a lot of euphoria when I cut my hair for the first time. I had long hair for a lot of my life, and then I cut it, and I was like, oh, I love how I look. This is so great. You know, but someone who was a cisgender woman, might have cut her hair short and thought, oh, I hate this. This is not what I wanted. And then get gender euphoria from growing her hair long again. There's all kinds of ways you can experience it. And then finally, dead name. This is the name a trans or non-binary person doesn't use anymore after they transition. Just to touch briefly on the word queer, it's one that I'm going to use a lot in this presentation because I think it's a very helpful term and I really like it. I have kind of a complex identity myself, and a lot of folks have a lot of identities that intersect between gender and sexuality and romantic attraction and all these things. So queer can be a really just nice, inclusive catch-all term. But it was definitely a slur for a long time, and therefore some folks, are not comfortable with it and don't want to reclaim it, and that's totally fine. So, it's just to make a long story short, it's embraced by lots of folks, but not everyone. So, if you're not queer yourself, just use a little bit of caution in applying that term to people. Pronouns, again, just going through this real quick. So I'm sure using pronouns for someone is politeness and a great source of gender euphoria. It's very nice to normalize sharing pronouns if you have the opportunity to identify yourself during introductions or add them to name tags. If you know someone who uses multiple pronouns, I can say from experience, it's very fun when people mix them up. That's nice. And then just, people push back a lot against singular they. Oh, it's not grammatically incorrect. But like, you totally heard someone say singular they. Someone called, but they didn't leave a message. Like, it's a very common thing. And then neopronouns are becoming more popular, kind of to counter that issue with singular they. So the ones I have on here are they here. There's lots of interesting ones out there. There's a great list at this link. I assume we can send out the PDF of this presentation. Tiana's nodding. Thank you so much. So there's lots of links in here that you can use after the presentation. And just a few final notes on etiquette and safety. So always important to use someone's preferred name and pronouns, but mistakes happen. I had a friend who transitioned a few years ago, and just when I got used to their new pronouns, they transitioned again to be non-binary. And so now I'm learning another new set of pronouns. So, if you make a mistake, just correct yourself briefly. Totally normal. Also important to avoid sharing a person's dead name or AGAB if you know it, just very personal information. And similarly, sometimes queer people get a lot of questions about like medical procedures they've had or relationship with their family. And, if you wouldn't ask a cisgender person that, you probably shouldn't ask a queer person that either. The big caveat here, of course, is especially, given everything that's happened in 2025 with a lot of, increasing attacks and negativity towards queer people. Some folks might only be out in part of their lives. They might only be out at work. They might only be out in your friend group. So, if that's the case, it's important to, not out anyone on accident or purposefully. We've reached our first little stopping point. Does anyone have any questions or comments, stories, ideas? I'm refreshing the Menti. All right, not seeing anything there or in the chat, so we will power on. All right, here we go. Meat and potatoes of this presentation. Non-binary nature. So this presentation and the presentation I gave at Rally and all of my queer nature interest began when I was in college. I was in a environmental literature class, and one of our assignments was to pick a spot on campus and journal about it throughout the spring semester. And so at my spot, and I didn't know very much botany at all at this point. So at my spot, I saw this little tiny flower start coming up, and like, I would return there a couple times a week, and so I got to see it keep coming up, and the little leaf formed around it and then began to open, and then the flower itself opened, and it was just like a very cool thing to witness that happen. And then it was just this beautiful, sweet little white flower. So I had to look up what it was, and the name just stopped me in my tracks because it's called bloodroot. I just thought that was so funny that this little flower that I thought was so sweet and cute is called bloodroot because it has toxic roots. So anyways, it became my favorite native plant, and when I was learning about it, I had just come out as bi myself, so I was pretty thrilled to learn that in scientific terms, the bloodroot is a bisexual flower, which is also known as a perfect flower. So obviously that was very delightful, even though in scientific terms, all that means is that bloodroot has a male and female parts on one flower. So, very much not the same as the human connotation, but it still worked and made me very happy. So I started looking around for other examples of queer identities in plants and animals, and boy, there are a lot. Here's birds, here's mammals. And this isn't even getting into, frogs and toads and salamanders and bugs and all kinds of things. Um, these are some resources that I relied on when I was learning more, especially this book on the left, Biological Exuberance. This is a really cool book where sorry, I just let someone into the waiting room, Tiana, or out of the waiting room. So this is a great book. This scientist collected basically observations of gay and lesbian behavior in animals from, decades and decades of scientific research in order to prove that, like, look, this is not unusual. This is not like an aberration. This is behavior that happens all the time. And the scientific community needs to stop treating it as just like weird outliers and acknowledge this as part of the diversity of nature. So it's a really great book. It's extremely dense, but it's got lots and lots of your favorite animals in it. So I highly recommend taking a look at that. Evolution's Rainbow is another book kind of along similar lines. This one does get into humans a little bit, which is great too. And then I actually wrote a blog last year, so you can also find that online. And there's links to all of these and more information at the end of the presentation. All right. So let's talk about a whole slew of queer native species. So I really like starting with oaks, because for one thing, oaks are so ubiquitous. You have oaks everywhere. They are the state tree of New Jersey. So congratulations on a great choice if you're from New Jersey. And they are cornerstones of their ecosystems. They support all kinds of other species. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands, of caterpillars and bugs that feed birds and mammals and all the way up the food chain. So I think, this keystone species that supports increased diversity to me is like a very queer elder thing to do. But beyond that, beyond the vibes, oaks also have some very queer traits. For instance, oaks have both male and female flowers on the same tree. So in scientific terms, this is called monoecious. We might say intersex or bigender. Oaks are wind pollinated, but they can also self-pollinate. So they're on the asexual spectrum. And oaks will also hybridize readily with other oak species. So I think, we can very loosely call that pansexuality. I wanted to put hemlock on here as a bonus because that's the state tree of Pennsylvania, and hemlock is also monoecious. So you guys also have a cool intersex tree to enjoy. Next up is white-tailed deer that I also love to talk about. I was happy to see they are the state animal of Pennsylvania. White-tailed deer are part of a very, kind of manly hunting culture in the US, but they have some really interesting queer traits. So deer can have a couple different conditions that can cause them to be visibly intersex. Like, if you're a hunter or you've been in the hunting community, like you've probably heard a story about someone shooting a doe with antlers. And so that can be caused when a doe has such high testosterone levels that she grows antlers. You can also have deer that have they have so much they have enough testosterone that they grow antlers, but they don't have enough testosterone to shed antlers, and so they get these like big crazy antler formations called cactus horns or velvet horns because they're not shed, so they continue to be covered in velvet. So that's like a really cool intersex trait. Um, and then beyond that, this is an idea that was discussed in that biological exuberance book, is that you know, male deer really only interact with females during mating season, and the rest of their deer lives, they spend with other males. Those are the deer who they socialize with, the deer who they rely on for, safety and companionship. And so, there's a lot more to relationships than just who you have sex with. So I have awarded male deer a gay pride flag because I think they have pretty gay relationships and priorities. Next up, this is the common blue violet. In Wisconsin, we call it the wood violet. It's our state flower, as well as the state flower of New Jersey. Um, this one shares some traits with the bloodroot, actually. Well, I'll talk about that second. First off, the common blue violet is also on the asexual spectrum because they can reproduce with pollinators, but they actually have two self-reproductive methods. So if conditions are bad for pollinators, they can form a little tiny flower close to the ground, and it self-fertilizes its own seeds, which is really cool. And they can also spread by stolons, which are stems basically that they can spread vegetatively by. So instead of spreading by like a root, which would be a rhizome, they spread by stolons, which is a stem. Um, so I've given them the asexual flag. And then they also have an adaptation with their seeds, which is what they share with bloodroot. So the seeds have a little, they call it an oil body or an eliasome, which is a food source for ants. So ants will take the seed and bring it down to their burrows. They'll eat the oil body and then they'll put the seed on their trash pile, basically. And of course, that's like a rich compost pile and provides a great place for a seed to grow. So this is a partnership that's one of my favorite words, myrmecocori. And I just think that's, there's so many different relationships in the animal world, the plant and animal world, even though there's so much competition between species, there's almost also so much cooperation and, a diversity of partnerships, which is, again, kind of a queer theme to me. So I was looking for a graphic of like a non-traditional family structure, which is like that funky person at the bottom there, which really made me laugh. So that's why that's there. And then the last thing violets have going for them is cultural. So Sappho, the very famous lesbian poet from ancient Greece, wrote about violets in one of her poems. And then in 1927, there was a play about lesbians, and the lead character wooed her love interest with a bouquet of violets. And so violets became known as the lesbian flower. They actually suffered a big decline in being sold by florists because of that. But if you supported lesbians or you were a lesbian and wanted to signal that, you would wear a violet on your lapel, which I think is really sweet. Next, I want to talk about honeybees. Speaking of pollination, so again, kudos to New Jersey for having a cool state insect, I think is what this one was. But this is also true of our native bees, our bumblebees and our solitary bees. So, in honeybees, we have a queen and we have workers, and we call those two females. And then we have drones and we call those males. But really, honeybee reproduction is so crazy that like trying to assign any kind of human sex to it is wild. For one thing, I mean, they have an insane ratio of sexes. You have one reproductive individual, the queen, in a colony of literally 50,000 individuals. You also have drones that only make up between 1 and 15% of the hive population, depending on the time of year. You get more drones in the summer when the colony is reproducing, and then most drones don't survive the winter. The worker bees chase them out. The other thing that I just learned, literally like a month ago, that's still blowing my mind, is that drones only have one chromosome. So instead of, doing reproduction like we do, where the baby gets a chromosome from each parent, drones only get a chromosome from their mothers. So drones don't have fathers. And that's pretty crazy. So that's why in a hive, technically worker bees can lay eggs, but they will all be drones. Um, Only the queen who has mated with other bees can make worker bees and new queens. Um, so that's wild. So I'm giving bees the non-binary flag because that's definitely not related to our binary way of doing things as humans. And then I want to talk about the Hellbender, the official amphibian of the state of Pennsylvania. It's cool that you guys have an official amphibian and that it's this guy. All the other species I've talked about so far and will continue to talk about are also in Wisconsin. Not this guy. I can't imagine finding a gigantic salamander. So for one thing, I mean, this is just like such a unique and cool animal. I feel like that gives it some inherent queer flavor. But I was able to look up some more fun facts about it too. So the hellbender is mainly solitary. It does not have any interest in interacting with others. Even mating is like very bare bones, and then they go their separate ways. So for the hellbender, they get an aromantic flag. Not interested in any of that. The other cool thing about hellbenders is that the males are the ones that parent their young. So the males are the ones that build a nest site. The female comes and lays eggs, and they get fertilized by the males. Then he chases the female away. He's the one that guards the eggs, and he's the one that provides parental care to the offspring. So again, hellbenders get this kind of non-traditional family structure graphic. I think that's really cool of them. So, as long as we're talking about symbols, let's talk about our national symbol, the bald eagle. This is one of my favorite stories. This is a specific story, but it has been documented in other places. So, this is a story of three polyamorous eagles in Illinois. They were captured on a Nest camera starting in 2012. So there was a female eagle named Hope and her mate, whose name was Valor. And Valor was a lousy parent. He was a bad father. He was not interested in incubating the eggs. He did not bring very much food to the nest. They did not successfully raise any babies. So Hope got sick of that, and she went out and found a new mate. And they called him Valor 2, which is kind of insulting. But anyways, Valor 2 was a much better dad. He mated with Hope. They raised some babies. But the funny thing is, Valor 1 stuck around. And then a few years passed, and researchers realized that these eagles were, all three of them, cooperatively parenting. Like Valor 1 had learned from Valor 2. They were all bringing food to the eaglets. They were all helping with nest building and incubating. And both males were mating with Hope, which is pretty crazy because usually eagles are very territorial. And then there was another twist in the story, which is that their nest got attacked by rival eagles and Hope disappeared. And they already had some young fledglings at that point. And so the two dads successfully raised both these babies to fledge. And so Valor 1 really stepped up as a father, which is crazy. And then that fall, they found a new female, and her name was Star. And again, the two dads stayed together. They welcomed Star to the nest. And the last updates I could find on this story was from 2019, but all three eagles were still living in polyamorous bliss, raising babies on the upper Mississippi. Um, so that's an extremely fun story. There is a link here to read more about it. There aren't any updates after 2019, so hopefully they're doing well. I mean, they've had a long run from starting in 2012. But the article does mention that these kind of eagle threesomes have been observed in other nest sites. And someone else also mentioned that, there are thousands of eagle nests out there. And how many do we have trail cameras on? A tiny fraction of them. So, it's really interesting to think like how much of this behavior is this behavior more common than we think? Are we just not seeing it? Are we just not acknowledging it like scientific literature did for so long? So anyways, I love these eagles. And so yeah, now chit-chatting about some of our other native species who are not state symbols or national symbols, but still really cool. For instance, the white-throated sparrow. So this species has evolved four sexes. They have a chromosomal mutation, and they have two color morphs, the white striped and then the tan striped, that have very different behaviors. Um, the chromosome that controls the color is also linked to a whole bunch of other traits, and it got flipped around. So the white striped are more aggressive, they sing more, they fight other birds, they claim more territory. The tan striped are more nurturing. They are the ones that are really, really good parents. They take care of their young. And really interestingly, nesting pairs almost always consist of one bird from each color morph. And the reason for that is all the females prefer the tan-headed sparrows, the tan-headed males. But because the white striped are so aggressive, they're the ones who snap up those desirable males. So the tan striped females are kind of left with the white striped males. But it really works out well to have kind of an aggressive, fighting, defensive parent, and nurturing and baby-focused parent in each group. And so their offspring have they can be kind of any combination of these traits. The other fascinating thing about this is that we did not know this for a long time. At least, Western science didn't. It was believed that the tan-striped individuals were just a juvenile morph, that only the white-striped ones were the full adults. So again, what else are we missing? What else is right in front of us that has really unique traits that we're just not realizing because we haven't studied it enough? Next up, we have another wonderful plant. So this is Jack in the Pulpit. Hopefully you've had a chance to see this spring. If you haven't, it's a really cool, actually a tropical remnant from long, long ago. Just a very unique looking plant with this flower that has this funky little shape. And then I guess like the thing inside is called a spadix, but I guess that's Jack, and you can look at him in his pulpit. But Jack in the Pulpit is a perennial plant. So it comes back year after year. And because of that, it's evolved this, kind of clever reproductive strategy. So it begins its life by producing pollen. This takes a lot less energy, but it offers less reproductive success, right? You have to hope that that a fungus gnat, which is their pollinator, is going to land on you and get some pollen, and then it's going to go and land on a female, and then that's going to pollinate and work, and your genes will carry on. So after a few years, when the plant gets larger and stronger, it switches sex and it starts producing berries, and then it gets sometimes called the Jill in the pulpit. And this way, the plant has a much higher chance of reproductive success because, all the pollen is coming to it. Its berries are getting pollinated, and its genetic material is guaranteed to be in those seeds. So the scientific term is dichogamy. It's not very common, but Jack in the Pulpit is an extremely cool transgender plant. Oh, a sip of water for the waterfowl. Swans and geese are really cool. And this happens with other waterfowl sometimes too. So they mate for life, and this influences the fact that they frequently form same-sex pairings because it has reproductive benefits for them. Lesbian pairs, so female-female pairs, get to mate with the strongest males every year. So if you're in a heterosexual pair, as a female, and maybe you got like kind of a bad male, like you're stuck with him for life. Like that's how goose mating works. But if you're a lesbian goose or swan, you can pick the strongest male every year that you want to father your eggs. And then, of course, when there's two of you, you lay this giant double clutch of eggs. And then gay pairs, being made up of males, which are generally larger and stronger, they can defend the best territories with their combined strength, and they're really good at protecting their young from predators. So it's really fascinating. Gay pairs will actually kind of bring in like a surrogate female, mate with her, she'll lay eggs, and then they chase her away. Like it's just the two of them, and that's what they want. So really fascinating examples of lesbian and gay behavior in wildlife. So this is the kind of the second to last species we're going to talk about. Fungi. So you may have heard that fungi are crazy and they can have literally tens of thousands of biological sexes. Um, this is still like kind of baffling to scientists, but the simplest explanation that I've found is that it improves their chances of mating with a compatible individual. So again, when it comes to human sex, an XX chromosome haver needs to find an XY chromosome haver to reproduce. And that means that you can only reproduce with 50% of the population. But if you're a fungi that has 17,000 genders, then you can reproduce with, you know, 16,999 of them. You just have to avoid reproducing with a fungi that has your same sex. So again, just a crazy adaptation and very fascinating. Um, in addition, Tiana sent me this really cool article that I've linked here, just exploring the ways that queer phobia is kind of mirrored by mycophobia in Western society, the sphere of mushrooms, this view of mushrooms as, poisonous or diseased or indicative of rot, when really, they're fascinating and remarkable. So, just kind of celebrating the diversity and nonconformity of mushrooms and their very mysterious nature that we can't understand. I think they can just have like a general pride flag. They are a great symbol of the queer community. And then finally, I want to talk about coyotes. So, unfortunately, I could not find coyotes in Bruce Bagmeal's book, Biological Exuberance. There weren't any documented cases of coyotes' queer behavior. He does talk about coyotes as part of indigenous culture and coyote as being kind of this a trickster figure who can change sex and, very symbolic of fluidity and things like that. So there's definitely, a lot of interesting history there. But in speaking of coyotes as an animal, even though they don't have, documented queer behavior, I think they are a really good symbol of our queer community. Um, I got this idea when earlier this year I read this really great book called Coyote America. It's by Dan Flores. Funnily enough, I found it on a queer nature book list. The only mention of queerness I found in it was like one American general who was gay. So I don't think that was really enough to make it a queer book. But again, just the ideas, the parallels really drew me in. So for decades, the US government, the official policy was to eradicate all kinds of predators. We successfully wiped out wolves from the lower 48. We almost wiped out bears and mountain lions, and they were trying to do the same thing to coyotes. However, coyotes respond to pressure by having more pups and seeking new territory. So attempts to destroy coyotes actually caused a giant population boom. At the time of European settlement, coyotes were only found west of the Rockies. But now, as you've probably seen in the East Coast, there are coyotes everywhere. There are coyotes in every major urban area in the country and everywhere else too. So the attempts to drive coyotes to extinction actually resulted in them having this enormous population boom and becoming this ubiquitous feature of our landscape. And then similarly, when, especially during World War II, when, millions of people were being drafted, one of the questions was, are you a homosexual? And a lot of people had never heard that word before. What does it mean? Well, it means you're a man who loves men. Oh, you can do that? So that was, a major way that the idea of homosexuality spread in America. And then after the war, you had thousands of people who had just realized this about themselves being deposited on the coasts and creating these thriving gay communities in places like New York and San Francisco, eventually becoming, leading to the Stonewall riots and all kinds of queer activism 20 years later. So again, the attempt to kind of weed people out of the army actually resulted in this incredible spread of knowledge and queerness. And I mean, I think today, queerness is mainstream, and yeah, even when we're hearing about it negatively, people are talking about it. It's not, not something that people never speak of anymore. And I think that's why we're seeing such a big boom, in people realizing that they're a member of the LGBTQ community. I certainly would have come out earlier if we had ever discussed it in my little corner of Wisconsin. So nowadays, the fact that people know all the terms, people are talking about it, people are realizing these things. I think it's just amazing how much the knowledge is spreading and how much the community is growing. And with that, we're at a little break. So let me check the Menti. If anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, well, we're making good time. So we've just got a couple little sections left here. So first, just to touch on, our human community too. It's amazing to have all these plants and animals that we can relate to, but it's also really, really fun and meaningful to engage with our human community in the outdoors too. I think nature means a lot to LGBTQ people. It's a safe place where we don't have to be judged. We can be ourselves. There's nothing weird about us. So it's yeah, it really is important to the queer community. Connecting with the land, despite being, kind of in an urban focused community for a long time. I think a lot of people are getting back to the land. So for one thing, there's all kinds of interesting queer history. I was excited to learn that Walt Whitman, who is kind of famous for his homosexual relationships, but also seemed to have some very profound relationships with women. We won't do any bisexual erasure for Walt Whitman. Who knows what he would have called himself? It was a very different time, but I thought this was cool. He lived in New Jersey for the last 19 years of his life. So you guys can get Walt Whitman. Sorry, I couldn't find anyone historical for Pennsylvania. I'm sure there's cool folks out there. Um, but queer people have always been here. In Wisconsin, there is this really great story of this historic site in Mineral Point, which is a little town near Madison. Dalk actually has a preserve there. It's this historic site called Pendarvis. It is made up of historic buildings from the Cornish miners who first settled the region. And in the 1930s, they were kind of, falling into disrepair. They weren't being maintained. The history was being lost. And these two men came along and they somehow, in the midst of the Great Depression, purchased and revitalized these buildings and turned them into a historic attraction with um, a Cornish tea and like lovingly restored buildings. And so that's an amazing thing to do when the country is in the midst of this like crazy economic recession. But they were also a gay couple doing this. So it's just really incredible that they were able to make that happen. In Wisconsin, we have two really great books on LGBTQ history. These were both published by our state historical society. So, I don't know if Pennsylvania and New Jersey have books like that, but I hope you do. The National Park Service also did this really cool LGBTQ American History collection in 2016, where they have all kinds of just collections of stories about various queer folks across the US, queerness in various communities like Black communities and Asian American communities. Unfortunately, last I checked, that link did not work anymore on the Park Service website, so you can probably guess why. However, folks, of course, have archived this, and so this link does work, and you can find all those resources. It's also linked at the end of the presentation. And then, there are lots and lots of modern queer outdoor activists. You might be familiar with Patagonia. If you're not, you should totally follow her on Instagram if that's something you like to do. She is a drag queen, social media sensation, and an environmentalist. She's based out of Oregon. Um, And then there are lots of other groups who are, operating nationwide. I think you guys on the East Coast are very lucky. There's a lot of folks based out of Washington, D.C. I don't know how close that is to you. I have no sense of distance on the East Coast, but it's closer than me. So there are lots of really cool folks doing cool things. So if you're interested in getting involved or wanting to partner with these people, especially as members of a land trust, that's a really cool thing to do. Okay, another brief break. Checking the Menti. All right, we'll push on. So we'll wrap up. This is one of my favorite quotes because Aldo Leopold is a Wisconsin native. Sand County Almanac, his famous environmental work, is about Wisconsin. And that's another book that I read in college shortly after coming out as bi. And this quote really just spoke to me and made me feel, kind of proud of who I was. So, nonconformity is the highest evolutionary attainment of social animals. So yeah, here's our recommended reading and listening. I really did enjoy Coyote America, despite its non-queerness in large part. So also as Tiana mentioned, I initially gave this presentation specifically to land trusts. So that version has kind of some more action items. It goes in more into kind of sharing the stories of your local queer community. So if you are interested in that, that was recorded too, so there's a link to that. You can find the blog that I wrote last year. This book, Playing in the Dirt by Taylor Hartson, was actually a study they did on queer farmers in the Midwest. And so again, that's a way that a lot of queer folks are reconnecting with the land and with nature and with each other, is by taking up farming, much like I have. I've met some really incredible queer people who are farming in the Midwest, and usually in a way that is, very, very sustainable and with a focus on land protection. So that's also been just like, I'm very glad that that's part of my life. Um, Again, that link to Mycology as a Queer Discipline, extremely cool article from Tiana. LGBTQ Heritage from the National Park Service. And then this LGBTQIA Resource Center from UC Davis is just like a very comprehensive group of resources about pronouns and specific definitions of lots of there's lots of identities I didn't even touch on. There's more coming every day. And that's very cool, but you might want to give it a Google sometimes. And so this is a great resource center for that. And then just a couple of podcasts if you're more inclined to listen to things. And then yeah, just type in a quick search into Google and you'll find all kinds of things. Again, despite the challenges of kind of the current administration and the current culture in the US and just the shifts that's taken in the past few years, we still have so much more, you know, so many more resources available than we did previously. So many more books and articles and people just sharing their own thoughts on, the intersection of queerness and nature. Um, it's just, they cannot take that away, and it is wonderful to engage with all of these stories that are being told. So yeah, you can definitely find something that interests you, or, it would be wonderful to hear your own story of your experience with queerness in nature. And with that, we're on the final slide. So please feel free to email me if you'd like to talk or discuss ideas. I would love to hear about any, LGBTQ nature outreach or adventures that you get to have in the future. So thanks so much for being here tonight. If anyone has any final comments or questions, please feel free to share them.
Just say thank you so much, Emilee. That was amazing. I know when I first saw your presentation, I just completely fell in love with all of it. And um, we do have Martha says local radio show just had a segment on queer nature, and I thought it might be you, but alas, it was not. Ooh, well, we should definitely share that. We will be sharing a recording of this with everyone who signed up, as well as a bunch of the resources. I can compile those. And thank you, Emilee, for all of the research you did. Tina says, thank you, lots to explore. And Martha added, first episode of Leaf It To Us was about sex change in plants. Is Leaf It To Us the podcast, I think? Maybe? Martha, yes. Martha works with
Yeah.
us.
Oh, I just remembered the striped maple. Did they talk about the striped
Oh,
maple? Striped maple, if it gets injured, will change its sex for some reason. I don't remember why. We don't have those here, so I haven't looked into them very much. But like that's an extremely cool thing.
my gosh. Now I'm going to be like on a Reddit spiral of the striped maple.
Yeah, I forgot about
That
that
is
too.
amazing. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to add them in the chat or feel free to reach out. You know how to find us. And you can also reach out to Emilee at the email. But thank you all for joining us. Kim says, thank you so much, Emilee. Great presentation for Pride Month. Yay!